it's Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills, and today we're talking with guest expert Christopher Rodden, who will help us prepare to deliver that high stakes talk, whether to your team, organization, or a completely unknown audience in a way that maximizes your impact and joy and minimizes your anxiety. So a lot of us actually have stage fright. It's a normal thing. So is performance anxiety. And Chris has the skill set to help us today. And I think it is also perfect for season five's focus on making a greater impact, because if you cannot deliver an impactful message that is inspiring to other people, it's going to be really hard to gather people around it and to influence, right? So it's a really critical skill. I'm very excited to have him here. On the show, we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills, meaning the most challenging soft skills needed to make a real impact through your leadership. I'm a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, group and team facilitator, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, author of the Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, and had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigate their leadership complexities. And before I introduce Chris formally, I want to do one more reminder that we're actively enrolling for our 10-week leadership accelerator called FUEL, which stands for Focused, Unstoppable, Empowered Leadership. And it's made for high-performing, high-achiever misfits who have a hard time with pacing and overdoing things and standing out, maybe in ways that they don't want to now stand out, but want to be more intentional, strategic in their next leadership role, even if they haven't identified what that next leadership role is. We do have a few remaining spots open. You can learn more and enroll by September 19th. That's just in a few days, September 19th, by going to gotowerscope.com and clicking on Leadership Community Programs and then FUEL. We start September 23rd. I would love to have you part of this. Okay, now without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce our special guest today, Christopher Rodden. Chris is a performance coach who works with global leaders and teams committed to authenticity, to strengthen relationships, tapping into their full potential, and driving innovation. He brings an interesting mix of over 20 years as a European regional director of a top 10 global accounting network and as an accomplished musician and performer. Welcome, and really great to have you on the show, Chris.
Well, thank you very much, Mira, and it's really my pleasure to be here with you today. And thank you for synthesizing so much the elements of what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, you might notice Chris's accent. He's in the UK. It's 11 p.m. his time. So I'm super appreciative that he stayed up late just for us. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
So
one of the things about working internationally is that you do work through different time zones, and you have to get used to that. And I did a lot of this when I traveled in my former role, because you have to be kind of ready when you get to the other end, whichever time zone it is.
That's true. How many time zones did you typically cross in a given year?
Well, most of the work I did was within Europe. There were other meetings we used to have in North America or occasionally Latin America and further afield. But I certainly went around most countries of Europe, and some very frequently. So
yeah. So that sounds like that's about a 9-hour shift back and forth sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes indeed.
Yeah. And I think that's also an interesting aspect of your background, is that it's not just your leadership experience, it's not just your musical performance background, but also because you've had a chance to see how this plays out with people from lots of different backgrounds, cultures, languages. And I'm especially curious about that as well, like what you've learned from, are there differences, in how different people from different cultures and backgrounds approach performance as well. So maybe let's start there. What have you learned from that?
I mean, that's a fascinating thing. I mean, if I just touch on my former role, I mean, when I started as European I think, executive manager as I was back then in 1998, this was a role really to try to bring the European region together within this global network. They hadn't had a dedicated person full time to do that role before, so this was an experiment. And what rapidly became quite clear to me was that many of the European countries were wanting to feel more close to the centre. They wanted to get more involved, and there was a sort of tradition, I suppose, built up because in those days the London firm had founded the network, so the network was in a sense something that for them was very natural. I suppose they probably saw it as theirs, and the trick was, well, how do you then bring this together in such a way that people step up and want to contribute, but also so that the leading firm can also see that there are valuable contributions to be made from firms that are obviously much smaller in some cases than theirs. And you're really dealing with diversity in a big way, both from the size of the businesses, the different economies, the different legal systems, the different cultures, and the languages. And so, as you well know, I mean, having an international meeting, even just with, say, 8 or 9 people, is a completely different animal than having a national meeting within your own culture, where so many of the cues are so natural and everybody knows what to say and do and how to look. And suddenly you've got a whole group of people who are thinking, how do I get my position across? And, in a sense, this whole thing about how you have a smooth way of actually dealing with things, it doesn't exist until you create it, I would say. And so you have to create a way in which people feel comfortable, they recognize where they are, they have an identity. And I think that's what probably we spent a lot of time at the beginning trying to create, so that people felt able to speak. And you really have got to practice that skill of learning to live with differences, listening to differences, being curious about differences. Otherwise, if you get upset about differences, which can happen obviously in different settings in business, then your choice really is, well, are you validating these people or are you invalidating them? And often this is done unwittingly, but it's amazing how a small expression of surprise can sometimes be a put down for somebody else. And the result is that you gradually notice that those people stopped coming forward a little, they feel more reserved about speaking. And so the trick is, how do you manage that process where you may want to reach a combined position, you may want to even actually gain consensus for a position you have, but you can't simply go in and say, well, I'm going to do it the French way or the British way or the German way. I mean, you can try that, but obviously it comes with risks attached.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I already have a million questions for you. So that almost means to me, like, so within a culture, right, we often develop these shortcuts to understand each other because we sort of understand some of the variations in within culture about what people mean or their expressions on their face, or crossed hands versus an uncrossed, right? And sometimes that gets us in trouble. Those leaps that move us from, that help us with the shortcuts also get us in trouble with making assumptions about what somebody meant, because you think even though that might not be what they meant. In a situation like this, with people from completely different cultures, countries even, right? To me, that means that you have to slow down in the beginning to create like a set of new norms and rules amongst yourselves, so that you're not making assumptions that only come from your culture, but have no intention based on the other culture of being sent. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, I think. I mean, what it brings to mind is some training that I did in mediation and emotions, understanding emotions. But I did this much later in my career. And it was really useful to understand a bit things like some of the basis emotions, the the 6 or 7 emotions that are generally considered to be common in most cultures. Happiness, joy, belonging, disgust, sadness, anger, probably that's them. And, just to understand that, how those get expressed may be slightly different, but those are likely to be fairly common. Non-verbal communication, how you read this, these somatic markers of behavior that if you get more finely tuned to, it is useful to actually gauge where people are. But more importantly, starting with yourself, because if you don't know yourself, how you're experiencing yourself in a moment, in a meeting, wherever it might be, if you don't know what emotion you're feeling, you can often get triggered by things, and you're almost it's a bit like being in a dark place where you don't really know where you are. I was going to mention actually some of the work of Dan Siegel, who is from UCLA and is a medical professor and has done a lot of work in emotions and how you actually can begin to distinguish these, the value of doing this, the way the brain works. And one of his well-known phrases is name it to tame it. So in other words, if you can start to get a nuanced feeling for what you're actually experiencing, let's say there's an escalating argument going on in a meeting. If you can tell whether you're just irritated or whether you're angry or which one it is, just saying that to yourself, I feel irritated, that actually helps to dial down the feeling. So this is why having some emotional training and some access in understanding your own emotional makeup can actually be really useful in decision making and in managing difficult situations. It goes together with all the cognitive stuff, but it's really useful because suddenly it's not like being in a dark room anymore. You've suddenly got a torch and you can suddenly see, that's how I feel, not that.
Right. And so now I know where you're going with this, but some of our audience members might not. Connect the dots for them. How do these cultural differences, whether it's within your own country or across countries or whatever, and naming your emotions in the moment, how does that connect to performing in front of people, whether it's team, organization, and to or to people that you've never met before in a new audience? And I just noticed that we're reaching an ad break, so I'm going to drop that there for you to think about and respond after the ads. You are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Chris Rodden. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to join our online audience right now and ask questions that we can answer in real time, you can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Christopher Rodden. Chris, where we left off is how do you connect the dots between emotional awareness, cultural awareness and communication, and performing well?
Well, I suppose in an international context like I was working in, the way it was set up was that English was the common language. So I think it was always expected that that would be the language in which business would be done between the member firms. And occasionally, people with language skills in other languages could obviously speak the language of somewhere if they were going to that country or if they were meeting that firm at a conference or something like this. I found it was always helpful to me that I spoke German and some French. So not because of necessarily having conversations with those people, but more just having that awareness of what it's like to learn another language. Mm-hmm. So that when all these people come to our conference, you have some understanding that they are spending a lot of time listening to your language for 8 hours, which is not theirs, and it's a second language. And that's one of those things it's very easy to take for granted when it's your mother tongue and it's not others. Yeah. So I think that was kind of an important point where I don't think we always got that right, but I think we got better at it as time went on, to have that awareness, not to, to understand that Anglo-Saxon English can also be very nuanced and is not easy for people with second language English to understand. So just things like that help. I think culturally, it's always important to have an understanding of the thinking in different cultures, and you can obviously read about this and understand it a bit if you haven't got direct experience of it. I mean, I think sometimes misunderstandings arise because the use of words in certain languages are very prominent. In English, of course, it's very often that we say please, thank you, sorry. In other languages in Europe, it's not so much the case. And if you would say be in Scandinavia, you don't have this disposition to use the word please so much. It's only a minor word, and it's used in cases where you really need something, not when you just are using it at the end of every sentence. And sometimes that creates a misunderstanding. And I remember a time when there had been a Danish communication where it just wasn't understood why there wasn't a thank you or a please or something. But I also knew from someone in Denmark who's teaching Danes to speak English as a foreign language. She would remind them that if they went to London and went into a pub, they would have to go to the bar and say 2 pints, please, and not just 2 pints as they might at home. So I think that this all is on different levels, and I don't want to make it sound as though running an international organization is meaning that you have to get completely deeply into all of this. But I certainly think with a certain understanding it helps. And it helps to facilitate confidence in coming to discussions together. It helps people to speak up and feel included. And I think that's the important thing. And I think it's a matter of building respect, so that especially when, perhaps people are a bit more quietly spoken, they maybe take a while to express themselves, that if you're from a country that tends to speak very like that, you don't make a judgment about that. You just notice it's different and you allow that time that those people need. Sometimes those things can make all the difference, because you then discover something from those delegates that if they hadn't spoken, you wouldn't have known about. That's always what we were trying to do, I think, to get people to contribute, to engage, to put their point of view, to ask questions, so that we can have as rich a discussion as possible. And then hopefully we get the most engagement from our stakeholders afterwards in terms of building vision, acting out, their part in it, and operationally taking it forward.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to share some of the sort of connections that I'm making from what you're saying with the ways that I work with my leaders, but also the ways that I've learned how to navigate as an immigrant and what I've sort of pulled from that experience that applies here too.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you have some experience with needing to translate into a different language, like you said, what you learn is to slow down and not be so jargony. And the good and bad news of my own immigrant experience is I can't be jargony. I can't, I never picked up these sort of like traditional American colloquialisms, for example. I find it very difficult to understand them and to recall or use them. So the good news is that I speak very plainly. And when I went into a leadership role, I purposefully tried not to apply a lot of clinical psychology jargon or leadership jargon or anything like that. I just wanted to speak plainly so that I could be most easily understood. And that makes a big difference, I think, because it means that I'll pull more people in, like you said. You know, more people will be able to understand and not feel left out or excluded or confused. The other that I pulled is know your audience and their norms. You know, instead of trying to sort of bring them to your norms and then leave them confused or not clear or not connecting with you or not relating to you, try to get to know your audience and their norms. A third thing I pulled from what you were saying is anticipate what they might not understand. If you, like, for example, we have so many acronyms in some of our organizations, right? Yeah. That like anticipate the acronyms are not going to be well known even to some people inside the organization. So please break them down and not make any assumptions, right? Then like I'm also adding before the ad break where you were saying like label your reactions, know when you're having a reaction and what that's about and what pulled from it. I'd love to sort of pull on that thread in just a second. And then finally, building respect for your audience, pulling people in, developing trust with them. That overcomes so much miscommunication and confusion. And it also, all of these things, I think, help make you relatable and then influential. Did I pull all of that together?
Yeah, I think you did a brilliant synthesis there. Yes.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I am wondering now, with all of those experiences, how do you add your musical performance experience to this? What do you pull from that experience into the performance area?
It's interesting. I suppose what struck me when I started in this corporate role, as I say, with many different independent firms, we often would come to conferences, we'd have these gatherings. And it struck me watching them that with great respect, many of the people who were speaking and presenting, they really knew their stuff very well. They could get their facts across very well, but there wasn't really a sense of connecting with an audience or anything like that. And I suppose that's what struck me compared with being a musician, where really your job is to find your way to connect, because it's in that connection that people experience something beyond the notes and something that creates almost, I mean, I can only describe it, when you're sitting in a concert and, you've got a fantastic performer there, there's always the sort of initial sort of noise and disturbance a little bit at the beginning, but then everything kind of settles and then the person starts. And then depending on how they create that atmosphere, it just draws the audience right in to the point where you're almost completely unaware that it's nearly the end of the piece, because you've really been transported with your attention, that focus, because that person's just created a wonderful picture of something and told it so well. And it's whatever that ability is to draw people in. That's what's always fascinated me about how would it be if you could apply that to presenting, or even if you apply that in how you lead a meeting, for example. People talk about storytelling a lot now these days, and certainly sharing personal experience, sharing examples of where you've had hardship or difficulty or challenge yourself is also a standard way and a very important way to try and show people that however much of a leader you may be, you don't have everything handled either. And you are not talking down to them. You're sharing the fact that you understand where they may be coming from at times. But you have to balance that with also inspiring them and getting them to look up at something that's, going to look as though it's rather out of sight. But how would it be, folks, if we go for this? What does this give our people? What does it give our customers? What does it give our stakeholders? That kind of.
Yeah. What's coming up for me is when you think about like a great storyteller, some people have honed their story so well that like you're almost bored because like they've said it over and over and there isn't like that fresh feeling anymore. But some people are really good at making it feel to the audience like it's one of the first times they're telling that story, and they're still connecting with you, and it still feels fresh and it still feels authentic instead of like overdone.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, I would guess the same thing for music.
Yes.
Right. And so I would guess with music, there's got to be a way where you keep it fresh and it still feels like this might be one of the first few times, but I've been practicing for years. So how do you think about preparing enough, but making it feel like it's new to the audience and fresh?
That is a very interesting question and a really great question, I think, Mira. I think certainly as a musician, I've learned a lot of pieces which I've played many times, and I've always enjoyed playing the same piece many times. And I've never had this problem that sometimes people talk about and say, "Oh, but what if you get bored with it, or aren't you fed up with it, or wouldn't you rather play something else?" I think there's certain repertoire that we play, whether it's on piano or whichever instrument we might be playing. You just never get tired of it. And actually, the more you study it, the more you discover different things in it. So, obviously, when you're in your youth, the way you hear a piece of Mozart is through the ears of a child. And you might hear, for example, a lot of virtuosity. You might hear tenderness in the slow passages. But you won't really necessarily know how to reproduce this, even if you've got the technique. That comes later because it's a part of a maturing process. So even if you would set out to play a Mozart sonata the same way for the whole of your life, I don't reckon many people could manage to do that, because as we change, so does our playing, as with many things. So I think that's one of the fascinating things, that if you look also at, say, the great composers, how their works matured. If you look at, say, Beethoven's sonatas, 32 sonatas, the sonatas he wrote at the end are nothing like the ones he wrote at the beginning. So he was on a journey, and I'm sure as performers, we're also on a journey, and we learn intuitively about, I suppose, when perhaps when we're in our 20s, we look back at how we played in our teens and we think, oh gosh, that was a bit rough around the edges in some respects. You learn refinement, but you maybe don't know exactly how the refinement was created, but it's more your awareness has increased. You learn to listen for different things. You hear other performers who have a particular focus on some area of excellence in their playing that you're fascinated by. And all of those things can be influential, I would say, plus wonderful teachers who will direct you towards different things in your playing, or different things to listen to as role models in other people's.
Yeah. So learn your craft, hone your craft, and then see it as a journey of growth over time is what I'm pulling from it. Now we're reaching another ad break. And when we come back, I want to sort of take all of this and now think about how we might apply it to kind of our daily lives and how we pull out the joy and address the anxiety of, performing in a way that feels authentic. So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Christopher Rodden, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Christopher Rodden, who's talking with us about performance and bringing out the very best in performing, whether with our teams, at a talk, with an audience we're not familiar with, whatever that might be. And we were talking like just sort of general high-level principles, and now we're getting all practical. So, Chris, I imagine I am a leader and I have this really high stakes presentation I have to give. And I'm nervous. I want to connect with the audience, but I'm kind of freaking out because it's a new audience. I want to influence. I want to hit it out of the ballpark. But I'm totally in my head about it. And I'm likely to do one of two things: under prep so that I don't have to think about it and I'm avoiding the inevitable. And then I just show up as real anxious and winging it unnecessarily, or over prepping and I've got my slides and I don't move at all and I just read from my slides, also not connecting with the audience. How can I find the sweet spot where I can show up authentically, deliver a good presentation, even though I'm completely nervous? What do I do?
So I think a very important thing for me in the run up to this, in the weeks before, in the preparation, let's say you've got your text, you've got your slides, you know what you're going to say, and you've written it all down. Have you actually practiced speaking it, reading it aloud? Because one of the things I'm thinking is the parallel between being a musician and being a speaker. As musicians, we hear our sound. We focus very much on what we sound like. As speakers, we have to get to know what our voice sounds like. And we have to learn to like it. So sometimes, when you prepare a load of notes for a speech and you are practicing, perhaps you are reading it aloud, you're maybe even standing in front of a mirror, and you read a passage that you've written and you think, I'm not saying that with conviction. I'm not really saying that as I mean it. I would say if you rehearse that a few times and you keep coming back to these words are not me, drop it, change it for something else. What you need to do is make the words you. You don't need to make yourself into words that don't speak for you. If you do, everyone will see that you're not really behind it. And the strongest way you can impress an audience is to be behind what you're saying.
Yeah.
Both in
These
the
are
tone
fantastic.
and the delivery.
Yeah. These are fantastic. Okay. So first thing, prepare by actually listening to your own voice. And I have to say, for years, I avoided that myself.
Yeah, right.
My spouse is a professor, and I would listen to him for years. I mean, 2 decades, prep the same materials out loud multiple times before all of his classes. And I was like, why do you keep doing that? You must know this by heart. But he knew the importance of that preparation. And he is a really great presenter, but I avoided it. I thought, I don't want to do this. It's annoying. It's frustrating, all of that stuff. And it did hold me back for a really long time. So I can attest to the importance of that one. And make your words you. I really like that. A lot of us who are high achievers, we want to sound like experts. And so we have all of these quotes from people, or we want to, like I mentioned, use the jargon, but it doesn't feel or sound like us. So that causes me usually to trip over my own words trying to make it sound perfect.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So now let's say I'm practicing, I'm adjusting my words, right? How do I then get from what I'm doing at home in the comfort of my own home, and it's starting to feel comfortable, to actually being in front of an audience, feeling some combination of excitement, comfort, connection?
Okay, so when you're doing this at home, be prepared, I would say, for the beginning few times that you read this, you're going to have a thoroughly miserable time. And you should expect that, because it feels strange. It feels strange to read it. You have to and it's not that you have to very closely read the text, because at that stage, you don't know it so well. Gradually, as you get to know it better, you start to lighten up. I mean, suddenly you might even find things in it that actually amuse you, but I think you'll notice your change in relationship to what you've written. And you don't hold it as this serious thing you have to get right, because you're used to hearing it. You're used to thinking, shall I pause at that point? What is the message of this paragraph? What words do I maybe need to highlight a bit, or where do I need to look in the audience at this point if I'm trying to make a point generally to people? So I think it's that familiarization process that helps to take the surprises away by the time you get to the day, because what you're doing is giving yourself psychological safety. If I was going to go and perform a piece on the trumpet, let's say, or that's my other instrument, I mean, I might look at the line of music and think, actually, that's fairly easy to play that melody. I don't need to practice that. I'll just go on stage and do it. That would still be a foolish thing for me to do, because although it might be easy, it's much better to go through the motions of making myself play it once from start to finish, which is what it will be like in that situation on stage. And it's the same when you speak. How often do we actually read all the way through it so that we've actually got used to, am I feeling a bit tired after 15 minutes? Do I need to have a breather somewhere? Where do I start to notice my energy flagging in the whole sequence? Things like that. Once you get used to that, it's a breeze on the day, because suddenly that element of the surprises is taken away from you. And because you have that familiarity, this is the preparation under preparing. You can focus on the things that you might want to focus on, like, what's the dynamic of this stage today? What's the vibe in this room? Who's here today? Who can I look at? Who do I know shares this view or may want to hear me speak, or whatever it is? And suddenly you have got some attention left for those things. You're not worried about the script or the slides, because basically you know it. And that's where I think it's almost like you go from reproducing, and I would say reproducing is what you do when you're in the practice room at home, trying to get all the words right, trying to understand how long it takes, where you pause. You go from there, and then on the stage on the day, you are creating. You're creating something unique, something for this moment, something with some pauses here and there that takes this amount of time, that's in this acoustic, you have to project to the back of the room, whatever it might be. These are all things that make that occasion unique. Mm-hmm. And this was really one of the things that meant a lot to me when I was trying to improve my performance skills. I wanted to not just survive a performance of 20 minutes or however long. I wanted to actually live it, enjoy that moment, really feel that that moment was my moment. And that's, giving myself a bit of a plug here. That's why I started the enterprise and called it Live Your Performance rather than Survive. And I believe that that's something anyone can learn if they do take some of these practical steps. There are many other things like developing some emotional awareness so that when you get to the day and you feel, gosh, the room seems to be spinning and my breathing feels different. And where's my attention? My focus is going all over the place in the hour beforehand. It's understanding that those kind of things are normal. Our body is doing these things. We have adrenaline. We are feeling unpleasant feelings because we are effectively going into a danger situation. If this was, times past, it would be a danger signal to tell us that wild animals were coming and we ought to get moving. Unfortunately, the brain doesn't really distinguish between that level of danger and this kind of thing in a modern corporation type of life. So although it feels similar, it's important to do things like mindfulness meditations, let those feelings up if they feel unpleasant. And I'm prompted to think of what I think the psychiatrist Carl Jung said repeatedly, what you resist persists. So if you try and ignore those unpleasant feelings and think, oh, it'll be fine, it'll go away. No, it won't. It's still there and it comes back. Whereas if you can accept that, oh, I'm feeling tense, I'm feeling frightened, I'm in fear, suddenly that feeling can dissipate and change into something else. But if you try and ignore it, you're creating problems for yourself. So I think it's an important part of what I've discovered that helps me to really face those feelings whenever they come, know that they are part of the makeup on the day. It's kind of what life looks like when it's working as far as performing goes. But you have to kind of get to the point where you can accept that really fully.
Yeah, and we're reaching an ad break, but when we come back, I also want to talk about how can you prepare for unexpected curveballs? Yeah. And I'll give you an example. I did this talk I was told it's going to be a hybrid environment. And I came in, there's 250 people live in the room, 100 people out there somewhere, on the internet watching me. I had actually prepped a lot for this. I got, somebody who could respond to the chat questions while I was on stage, like lots of sort of contingencies. But what I didn't prep for, which really threw me off, was that I did not have any direct communication or contact available to me because of some tech issue with the person responding to my audience who was online. And so there was that and a few other technical issues that affected my presentation. And I was panicking all of a sudden, even despite all of the preparation that got me there. And so when we come back from the ad break, I'm curious, can you prepare for curveballs? And what, if anything, can you do to be ready for them? So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Christopher Rodden, and we'll be right back in just a moment. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to the Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Christopher Rodden. Chris, how do we manage unexpected curveballs? What do we do about it?
Well, I suppose it depends what the curveball is. I mean, it reminds me of a conference we had once in South Africa, where I went on stage to present and pressed the button, and for some reason, the slide that I was expecting to appear was missing.
Yes.
The introduction one just wasn't there. But actually, what I found was just by taking a breath slowly and just pausing for a moment, it all came back to me. The 3 or 4 main points that I was going to make came to me. It's just there was no illustration, and I just said them slowly. The rest of it was all the visuals were all fine, but I do remember thinking, "Gosh, that was a curveball." But I remember also someone coming up to me in the interval and saying, "Gosh, actually, that was the best presentation I've seen you give." And so I thought, well, that's fascinating, isn't it? Maybe it takes sometimes those things to make you, it summons up something extra in terms of your concentration, your spontaneity. You have to, you just find it. And it's in here somewhere. It's all there. I think we fear these things much more than actually the reality of dealing with them is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of spontaneity, you have this term, managed spontaneity.
Oh, yeah.
What is it? How can we use it for good?
So really, this is a bit the difference between, you've perfected your speech or you've perfected your practice and your playing. Is your job in a performance to come and just reproduce what you were doing yesterday? I would say not, because I think that actually gives you a hard bar to follow. If you're worrying about whether you can actually reproduce accurately everything you did yesterday, you're not present for the audience if you're doing that. Whereas if you can step out and see some of the unique features of this moment, you're prepared, you know the words well enough to be able to say them. You might make a few tweaks, you might even change 1 or 2 things. To me, this is what is a kind of managed spontaneity, because it's not going to the extent that you completely throw away everything you've prepared. And you would not be able to be spontaneous if you hadn't prepared. So the preparation is vital, that you did spend all those hours. But I think there's a sort of space in between being rigorously attached to the script or to playing the pieces you did yesterday and going completely wacko and doing something wild. I think there's a nice space in the middle to find a sweet spot. And that's what I mean. Because I remember once playing a piece of Schumann, which it's an introduction to a set of Viennese pieces, and it's a very short introduction, only 3 or 4 bars. And my professor said, what you need to do is to try and make this sound spontaneous. Of course, if I say to you, please make it spontaneous, it's not going to be spontaneous. But it gave me to thinking about, I listened to different pianists play those few bars, and some of them just did capture that sense of ooh, there's a real sense of anticipation about what's to come in the next waltz or the next piece. And that's what I was trying to evoke and trying to learn how to do. And I think that's a bit where this whole managed spontaneity thing came to me, because of course you can't be spontaneous and tell someone how to be spontaneous, but retaining the possibility of spontaneity for a performance, I think, is very important for freshness.
Yeah. You know what I'm pulling out of this, and the insight I'm having for myself is I prefer facilitating conversations instead of being a keynote speaker where I'm talking the whole entire time. And the reason is because I can be spontaneous and respond to the audience much more easily than I can feel comfortable talking the entire time at the audience.
Yes.
And even when I'm asked to do keynote speaking, I will still turn it into some kind of interaction where I get audience responses. I'm trying my best to turn it into a facilitative conversation, because otherwise it's very challenging for me to be spontaneous. And I think some of that, based on like my takeaway from this, is I under prepare for talks like that where I have to talk the entire time. And so I can't be spontaneous because I'm under preparing and I'm still like stuck on my script, as opposed to a facilitated discussion where I know where we can go with it and I'm like ready and fluid to go there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's fascinating. To me, this is a parallel process, because that is how you've, for me, facilitated our conversation. It's grown organically out of a plan that we had, but we have been able to move things around. We've been able to pick up on certain points more than others. And that's because you had the foresight and the skill to know how to do that. And I appreciate that. I actually think it also makes it far more interesting for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I had to talk on this podcast, and one or two times I did, I had to just talk the whole entire time because something happened with the guest. They couldn't make it. I had to make up something.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it was, for me, painful because I didn't have anything to respond to, just me, myself, and I.
Yes, yes, having to be the continuity person. Yes.
Yes. Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights into how you apply your musical performance, your leadership, your global experiences to helping leaders be more authentic in their leadership performances. And I'm wondering, what is one, I shared with you my takeaway. What's your one thing that you want other people to take away from this conversation?
I think it's to see that whatever perspective you have on what you're doing, whether you're presenting, whether you're playing, whether you're facilitating a meeting, prepare as much as you can. Sometimes you have little time, but accept that you have a view of how it's going to go. You have a view of what you think is going to be high pressure, what's going to be difficult, where you'll get pushback and all of those things. Prepare as best you can, but at the end of the day, try and stay in the moment, because it's in the moment that people are going to be able to relate to you. You're going to be able to listen to them, and then you're in a better position to be a listener, which is very important in a facilitated board meeting like this, rather than getting carried away with, oh, but this isn't quite the way it's supposed to go, and then trying to cram too many things in or whatever it is. But I think, a lot of the work I do is really directing people to say, what messages do you want to land with the audience, and how are you going to know if you have? So don't just talk to them for 40 minutes. Interrupt every so often and say, what are the 2 or 3 things you're hearing here? What are the 2 or 3 main messages you're getting? Ask for a show of hands. See what people are hearing. They may not be used to it, but if they don't respond, say, well, what I'm trying to get across is this and this and this. It just helps. It's a signpost, and it gives you that sense of security that after 40 minutes, you haven't just got a nice room full of quiet people who have not got a scowl on their face. You actually know that they've followed up, they've asked 2 or 3 questions. That's the value then, because you're getting some feedback about what you've done.
Absolutely. So if people want to learn more about what you do and even, contact you, work with you, where can they go? And what would you like to share about that?
So thank you for that. I mean, that's my website. I would like to offer the opportunity for anyone who'd like to have a half-hour coaching session with me on any particular leadership challenge they've got, but let's say particularly a performance-related one, a high-pressure one, doesn't have to be, but it could be. If you get in touch with me between now and Friday close of play, Friday the 13th of September, we can fix a time and we'll have a half-hour call sometime after that. That's my website, liveyourperformance.com. You can ping me an email at chris@liveyourperformance.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn as Chris Rawdon, and you can message me there. I'd be very happy to work with you and to understand a bit what you've got and what your challenges are, because I'm always interested in how we can make progress through challenges together.
Awesome. Thank you for offering that to our audience. So for those of you who are going to be listening later after the live and you won't be able to see this visual, it's again, liveyourperformance.com, liveyourperformance.com, and you can find all the information about Chris. And you could also reach out on LinkedIn. You can reach out chris@liveyourperformance.com, and he's offering a free 30-minute coaching session on, high stakes or performance question that you have. So I personally would take advantage of it before Friday, September 13th. So audience, what did you take away from today? And what, more importantly, what is one small thing that you can implement today, this week, that you learned from Chris? Share it with us on LinkedIn. You just heard he lives on LinkedIn. I lived on LinkedIn. Share it with us so we can cheer you on. Talkradio.nyc is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, all over the place. So please check us out. Help us increase our visibility, reach, and impact by leaving a review. And thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I am Dr. Mira Brancu, your host of the Hard Skills Show. Thank you for joining us today with our guest, Christopher Rawdon of Live Your Performance. Have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much.